want to talk a bit about two kind of, I guess you would say, social phenomenons that are polar opposites: third wave feminism and laddish culture. Now I could easily make this video about one or the other, but I'm deciding to amalgamate them because I've just watched an interview from 2016, but it's about the clash between these two kind of social phenomenons, and it raises a number of interesting points. Just a disclaimer here, I've been quite vocal in my criticism of third wave feminism and its hypocrisies and its man-shaming. I do also think it's overwhelmingly negative. I think that more often than not, third wave feminists have nothing positive to say about men or masculinity in the context of feminism. They'll say, oh, I have a brother, I have a father, I'm not anti-male, but in the context of anything to do with sex, men are bad. It's like negative. And I've seen very little evidence to the contrary. But having said that, I also have some issues with the guy I'm going to mention here. So this format was I think it was called Know Your Enemy or something like that. It was a BBC Three format, and I'd already watched an interview with this guy on Newsnight with Emily Maitlis. And this is Daniel O'Reilly I'm talking about. He went by the comedian named Dapper Laughs. I don't know what he goes by now. I haven't followed him that closely, but basically he got into a lot of hot water because of his rape jokes and his so-called Laddish banter, which kind of touched on that sort of stuff. And his show was axed from ITV, and he got into a lot of hot water. I've no doubt he has faced real personal pressure from this, but I can't say I'm overly sympathetic, and this is why. I should say, in the interview, the second interview, he was talking to Abby Wilkinson, who is a columnist, a freelance journalist on The Guardian, among other newspapers, and surprise, surprise, she's a feminist. I have to say, she wasn't what I necessarily expected. She wasn't coming in guns blazing. She was quite respectful. She just listened to him. She did ask questions, but it was this idea of meet your enemy, and it was pretty civil. You know, they weren't yelling at each other. It was a pretty civil discourse, which is always good to see. But anyway, I would certainly challenge her on feminist hypocrisies, but I want to focus particularly as a man on what he is, some of the things he's talking about, because he sort of contradicts himself. On one hand, he's kind of put out this message that I'm a totally different person from that portrayal. That's not me, that's just my comedy act. And he even tries to dismiss it as satire, like he's mocking the laddish culture. So he says. He also claims that he's the best placed person to talk to young men about attitudes to women. That may or may not be true, I don't know. Clearly he has a lot of support, as is so often the case with comedians. And I find with comedians, their supporters tend to be very vocal, you know, very enthusiastic in that support. But there's a fine line between being supportive and being a fanboy, where you're just blindly defending someone without really considering the criticism. So she brought up the rape jokes, and he was talking about context. For example, there's one where he has this knife and he says this is the best way to unhook a woman's bra. Now that's supposed to be a joke whereby, okay, well, that'll do it quickly, but if you look at the sketch, it's very obvious that, you know, women would find that intimidating. They would find that sort of setup to be intimidating. So what I would say to the fanboys is, if you have a sister or a girlfriend who has been raped, would you honestly just say, oh well, it's just banter? You know, the way I see it is comedians have responsibility, and it's not good enough to just say, I mean, he actually admitted that he was egotistical from the support he was getting, right? So he can't on one hand admit that and then say, oh, but whine about being the pin-up boy for criticism. I agree he's not the only one, there'll be lots of others. And he kind of went from self-pity to sort of claiming it like the comedy was separate from him, and he learned his lessons, and he sort of admitted that routine was a mistake, and that was a few years ago. So I don't know what his sort of act is now, what sort of direction he goes in now. I don't know enough about the guy, but I resent him saying this is the way men think. Not all men, no. Speak for yourself. Not every guy goes to the pub and makes rape jokes with their friends as banter. I can see probably a lot do, but I take issue with that. I take issue with him claiming to sort of represent all men. I also take issue with the idea that, and he said himself he didn't like the term banter, although he's popularised it. It's, this idea that anything goes. Let's just joke about, this slag is easy to get, banter. This bitch was too ugly to rape, banter. Really? I mean, I have a problem with that. And I don't see myself as puritanical with comedy. There is edgy comedy I can appreciate, but what I really dislike is this arrogant idea that you can hide behind comedy. What I would say is, I don't support bans on comedy, right? Just for the record. But if comedians have the freedom of speech to make tasteless jokes, and they can dismiss it whatever way they want as banter or whatever. I mean, I'd like to know how Roy Chubby Brown dismisses Bradford City Fire joke. No one invited me to the barbecue, And just keeping on the issue of comedy, let's say someone had lost a relative to a big disaster like Grenville or something else, the Essex lorry tragedy, and family members heard those jokes because they were publicised, because the comedian's particularly popular, and they felt hurt and angry. I would say they've every right to do so. You cannot say, just have a sense of humour. That is the most pathetic argument there is. Just have a sense of humour, because everyone has a different sense of humour. Okay? So what you may find funny, I may not find funny, and that's okay. It's like films, people like different things. I'm not going to say I demand that this be banned, but by the same token, I'm going to say you cannot silence people from criticism. A comedian, especially a popular comedian, has a degree of power. So it's not good enough to say, I'm just a comedian. I think that's a bit of a card's excuse, frankly. I don't, from what I've seen of this guy, I don't think he would personally go out and rape a woman. I really don't. But for him to say that it's all satire and he's mocking laddish culture, I think that's a bit of a cop-out from what I've seen. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but that's how a lot of people would interpret it. And he's saying that the sort of people that support him are 14 and 15-year-old boys. And he even conceded that there is a problem with sexual harassment in society. And you know what? As critical as I am of Me Too, and I am critical of some aspects of it, I'm critical of the kind of naming and shaming men without being tried. I think that's a very big problem. However, I'm also not going to say that there isn't a problem out there. I have personally seen it. I have seen guys who have this very casual attitude about, and it's not just being smooth, it's not just like, hey babe, do you want to go for a drink? Which you can say, okay, that's being smooth. It's just downright crossing a line. It's just like totally disrespectful to women. I'll just close with this point. I'll put a link for you to decide yourself with this, but it's from 2016, a few years ago. But anyway, people will probably now, his fanboys will say, you're a better male, you're feminized, etc, etc. It's funny because I know I'm not. I know that I'm critical of feminism. And believe it or not, there are people in society, there are men in society who don't particularly care for the hypocrisies of third wave feminism, but they can also see why women wouldn't like rape jokes, and they reject this idea that all men are okay with that. None of the men I know are okay with it. So it's not a case of being one or the other. You can be critical of both. And as a man, I reject this thing of it's just laddish banter. I think there is a place for laddish banter, but where are the red lines there? You could dismiss anything as laddish banter, and that's the problem.